All right, so the Nebraska Association of Resource Districts was established in 1972. There's 23 tax-funded local government units. These NRDs are based on major river basins. Nebraska and the Dakotas are the least forested states in the United States, and NRDs since 1972 have planted over 95 million trees. We do that. We monitor quality and quantity of water within our districts. They're charged with 12 areas of responsibility: erosion prevention control, prevention of flood damage, flood preventions, soil conservation, water supply and development, water management conservation, pollution control, water disposal, drainage improvement, fish and wildlife habitat, outdoor recreation and education, forestry and range management. What is a deep winter greenhouse? They're basically greenhouses that use environmental factors to provide protection from harsh temperatures and reduce fossil fuels. They're usually year-round functioning to some extent, but that varies from place to place, from greenhouse structure to greenhouse. They're usually specifically designed either for production during the winter or early season growing or late season growing. Climate control without heating. That's usually what you hear, what you think when you hear the word deep winter greenhouse or even geothermal greenhouses. Cost is a huge economical factor of greenhouse production. And these greenhouses usually are supplementing heat, are supplementing with propane, electric, and natural gas, but it's just a reduced input, especially with the geothermal greenhouses. Efficiency measures reduce operational costs and increase the profit margin, so that is what makes that geothermal aspect so vital and so useful. So I'm going to talk about some different features of these greenhouses, and it's not necessarily specific to geothermal greenhouses, but these are features that can be applied to most any greenhouse structure. The geothermal heating systems, there's two types. There's the active and the passive systems, and I think usually when we hear the word geothermal, we're thinking about the active systems. But they all have two main components: that's underground tubing and piping and a mechanism to push that air or fluid through. They work by turning over the air in the structure. So in the active systems, they are a water to air heat pump system, and they usually have a glycol medium as the heat exchanger and an evaporator or condenser for heat exchange. We're going to focus on the passive systems. Those use the ground as a heat sink or a thermal sink. They have different types of piping and tubing, or the piping and tubing is put together differently in a few different structures or a few different systems. And the only energy that's needed, or the only electricity that's needed, is for that fan to keep that fan running and turning that air throughout the tubing. So the fans blow the hot air through the perforated piping that runs underground. The warm air is pushed from the greenhouse into the tubing, and that warm air diffuses into the soil. That's the climate battery. If you've ever heard them called climate batteries, it's charging the soil with that heat, so that heat's like diffusing into the soil through the tubing, if that makes sense. They work in 3 different cycles: charging, storage, and discharge. During the charging cycle, that happens in the summer or in the daytime, so the hot part of the charging cycle, when the hot air is pulled in from the greenhouse into the tubes via the fan, and the warmth is distributed through the pipes and from the pipes into the soil. During the storage cycle, the hot air has warmed the soil to its capacity, so it's reached that high temperature that it's going to reach, and then it just maintains that temperature. During the discharge cycle, the air that's circulating through the tubing, is beginning to get colder than the soil temperature, so that soil temperature is raising the heat or the temperature of the air running through it. Heating and cooling mechanisms that use the ground as a heat sink. That's basically what the passive systems are when we're talking about geothermal tubing systems. It allows the soil to function as a battery to retain that heat that accumulates in the greenhouse during the day or during the summer. And they're usually characterized by some sort of system of pipes in the soil with a centrifugal fan blowing air through. Glazing. This is a very important thing to understand with all greenhouses. Glazing is like the skin of the greenhouse. It's a translucent covering. It's what's trapping that heat in the greenhouse. It's also what's protecting everything inside of the greenhouse. So there's three main types of glazing. You have your thin plastic films, the more rigid panels, your fiberglass, your polycarbonate, and then you have your third type, the glass, which are a lot more expensive to put up, maintain, and often expensive to repair if they get broken. Things to consider when choosing a glazing for a greenhouse structure is the longevity. There's quite a few that they only last a year. So if you are running some sort of operation where replacing that every year is okay, and that's appropriate for your operation, that's fine. Clarity, how much light is allowed to come into the structure? Is it blocking light? Is it blocking too much light for your plant to grow? And then thermal transmission or heat transfer. We'll get into that a little bit later. And any additional limitations that the glazing that you are choosing might create. There's four main mechanisms of heat loss in a greenhouse. The first is radiation, and that's the energy transfer between two bodies. Some glazings have an IR reflective coating that reflects the IR back into the growing structure rather than letting it emit outwards. So you have that IR coming in, and then it doesn't have that coating, it just bounces out, but with that coating it'll bounce back in, so you get to keep some of that heat inside. And then you have infiltration, or the number of exchanges a structure has in a natural state. So you have a newer greenhouse, you have tighter seals. If you have a really windy night and you have a leaky greenhouse, you're going to have a lot of heat loss by infiltration. Conduction accounts for most of the heat loss in a greenhouse. It's just the transfer of energy through the product itself. So you have your glazing, you have your heat kind of seeping out. And then convection, which is just the transfer of warm air towards cold air. You have U values and R values. I've seen a lot of R values associated with the polycarbonates, and then more commonly in general I see more U value measures. So the U value is the insulating performance of the material, so how much heat flow or heat loss occurs. And then the R value is the thermal resistance of a material to heat loss. They are the inverse measure of each other. They're both beneficial, they're both applicable, it's just the opposite measurement of the same thing. So with U value, the lower numbers, better performance, and then just the opposite. With R value, higher numbers, better performance. They're both measured in British thermal units, so BTU per square foot of 1 degree Fahrenheit per hour. That's a mouthful. I did include two slides that have those R values and those U values, and that's going to be beneficial for later because I'm going to give you some calculations on how to figure out what your heat loss is in your greenhouse. So then I have some different types of glazing material and some different characteristics that are beneficial. We have the plastic films, your rigid plastics, your glasses, and then some of the plastic additives I did want to touch on. So you have your IR blocking materials, your anti-condensation inhibitors, your UV blocking material, and some light diffusion materials and some anti-dust materials. Some of these glazing materials come with additives to either diffuse light, to reduce condensation, or to block some of your IR. So the orientation. So east to west alignment with a south-facing glazing in the northern hemisphere is going to maximize your solar gain. The orientation allows the sun to travel along the length of the greenhouse throughout the day, providing consistent light exposure. So if we have, let's see if I can get my orientation correct. If we have west over here and east over here, and we have a long greenhouse, and we have the sun passing through during the day, in the winter time, if the sun is sitting lower, you're still going to get a significant amount of light, as well as in the summertime. If it's higher, you get that direct overhead light, and it passes, and it's going to pass right over the greenhouse and give you maximum exposure. You also won't have your greenhouse blow away, or it'll be less likely, I guess you should say here. Passive solar heat retention, that's just, you're just collecting the free energy from the sun. That's nothing else. Solar orientation is important here, and ideally between 5 degrees true north, 15 degrees true south. Outside, you end up with having really hot summers and your air conditioning loads, and then you have issues in the winter time as well. In between that is kind of like the sweet spot. Solar heat storage. With solar heat storage, when you're collecting that heat during the day, if you have a way to collect it and store it during the day, it will release at night. So concrete, rocks, gabion walls, things like this, They will help release that during the night when you really need it. This is just showing the orientation of the sun. So it's going to be a little lower in winter, a little higher in summer. And if you're in between this area, you're going to maximize on that solar heat gain. Thermal mass. So that's the capacity of a material to store and release heat. Denser materials like concrete have a higher thermal mass. You have your heat coming in during the daytime, in through your glazing. It could even be in through a window, and it's heating up that concrete. Say you have hoop house on a concrete slab. It's going to heat up that concrete, and then at night that concrete is going to release that heat. So I have a picture here of the sun coming in through a window, heating up this, I'm guessing it's a concrete slab. And then at night, that kind of releases outwards. That's not to say that it's necessarily going to be enough to heat what you need, or it's going to meet your heat requirements, but it will offer heat. Partially below ground structures. I've heard them called a lot of things, so I just went partially below ground, or sometimes they're fully below ground, in earth. They draw from the earth's thermal mass to keep the interior warm during the night and cooler during the day. It reduces the heat and cooling demands, but a big issue with these is poor management of thermal stratification. So you get that hot air that rises and kind of sits at the top of the structure, and you get cool air pooling at the bottom. So you get this stratification, you get these layers of different temperatures in your greenhouse. That can be addressed. There are fans that are like downward facing fans or air stratification fans that can help bring some of that heat, push it and rotate it like this instead of your regular ventilating through the corridor of a greenhouse. The aspect ratio. When you have a traditional like non-geodesic style greenhouse, you have your hoop house, or I mean it doesn't have to be a hoop house, it could be a Gothic style greenhouse. You have a long greenhouse that's running east to west. You need to consider your aspect ratio. And that's the length of the greenhouse compared to the width. So a 1 to 3 ratio maximizes your solar gain and minimizes your heat loss. And so this just equates to how much sunlight the greenhouse is able to capture. Here's just a visual picture, little example. So these little ones are not as efficient as, say, these bigger ones with that 1 to 3 aspect ratio. The angle of incidence. I put this picture on here first before I get into the bullet points. But the angle of incidence is right here. First, I want to point out that these are two different examples of glazing. This is the structure. This is not a structure with two different glazing material. This is the structure, and this is an example of the glazing being here at that angle versus here. So if this is your sun, and this is the sun's rays, and it's low in the sky, so this is winter, your ideal angle of incidence is right here, and that is a 90-degree angle. That's going to be the same way you position a solar panel in the winter, and then you adjust it for the summer trajectory of the sun. So if you had, this is winter, and you had your greenhouse structure right here, or maybe it's your solar panel, you're going to have this obtuse angle, which is not optimal. So the angle formed between the ray of light hitting the glazing, that's your angle of incidence. So the maximum amount of light that is transmitted into a greenhouse when a ray of light is hitting that at 90 degrees, that is your optimal angle of incidence. So the glazing is going to reflect part of those sun rays, and that's why that 90-degree angle is your optimal angle, because that's going to only get about a 10% reflection. The amount of light lost to reflection is proportional to the angle of incidence. For the winter greenhouse to have an optimal solar gain, the glazing needs to be nearly perpendicular to the angle of incidence during the coldest, shortest days of the year. So that is exactly true with a solar panel if you're setting a solar panel. So you have your glazing, you have your 90%, that's at a 90-degree angle. You get your 87%, and that's light transmission. You're at that 87 right there. The more obtuse, the less you get. And I just like this. I just wanted to include this in the slide because I think it gives a good visual understanding of why that's important with, you know, your equinox, your low setting winter sun, your high summer sun. I just want to go over, I don't know if I'll have enough time to get too in depth in these, but these 3 different greenhouse structures. First, the series, which is geothermal system. They call theirs the GAT system. And then the Central Rocky Mountain Permaculture Institute, I attached a link at the end of the slides so that you could watch a tour. Jerome Ostentowski's greenhouse in Colorado, and then greenhouse in the snow, which is the Alliance greenhouse. So these are the 2 series structures. This is the residential, this is the commercial. How they work. So this is their geothermal tubing system, and this is their inlet or their intake, and this is their outtake. They work the same as all of the passive geothermal heating systems work. They store heat in the soil. Here they're pulling that hot air in during the day, distributing it through here, releasing it in the lower intake at night. This is the series commercial GAT system. So you have your 24-inch non-perforated manifolds in their system. So that would be these manifolds. And I don't know how clear this is, but this is their main manifold. And then they have 3 layers of holes. There's a bottom layer of holes, and you can see the tubing right here. You have your second layer of holes and your 3rd layer of holes. These are perforated 4-inch corrugated tubes, and they are connected 1 layer at a time, then backfilled, and the second layer is put in there, and that's backfilled, and so on with the 3rd layer. And they are usually only about 4 feet deep, and that's 4 feet to ground level right here. So air is pulled from the top with a fan, and it's distributed through the manifold and then through the tubes, and then it would come out over here at that inlet on the south wall. So the inlet is positioned higher in the greenhouse than the outlet so that you pull that hot air that rises in and distribute it more efficiently. This is their residential system. It's similar, it's just a little bit smaller, and you can see the system assembled over here, and it has all these little connectors. Here's your 4-inch perforated corrugated tubes right here, and you have an inlet and an outlet. And instead of using that 24-inch manifold, they have a 6-inch connector and 6-inch Y system. So that your 6-inch underground pipe would be right here, and then you have some feeder pipes, and then you have your Y pipe or your elbows right there. That's basically your manifold. And then you have the connectors and your reducers right here to get you to your 4-inch geothermal tubing, which is the piping that allows that air to be diffused into the soil. So these ones have 2 layers. So one of these layers will be laid at 4 foot, and one of these layers will be laid above it at 2 foot. So then we have the Central Rocky Mountain Permaculture Institute, and that's in Basalt, Colorado. That's run by Jerome Ostentowski. He is a Nebraska native. He's from Ord, Nebraska, Sandhills. And I'm not really going to get into his structure, but I did attach to watch a tour because he uses a lot of different heating and cooling methods, and I thought that would be really beneficial for you guys to see and look at because it's pretty interesting. So then there's Greenhouse in the Snow, and Greenhouse in the Snow is now in USA, Canada, and Europe. This one, I believe it's in Wakefield, Nebraska. It's a really neat one. So originally they're from Alliance, Nebraska. It was Russ Finch's Citrus in the Snow. And he teamed up with a gentleman named Alan, and they worked together and started really kind of mass producing these greenhouses. They learned a lot in the process, and so they've really developed into something a lot different than the very first structure was. And so if anybody was interested in that contact information, it's on their website, but I also have it as well if you wanted to tour or anything like that. They have the air tube systems, or what they called the geotubes, and those use 4-inch perforated tubing that's run underground, similar to the 4-inch perforated tubing that was shown in the previous slides. So it's a one-way open loop tip system, so it just runs from inside the greenhouse in a big loop and comes back in. And this system is not under the greenhouse structure itself. It uses a centrifugal fan to push the air into the tube. Tubes are buried below ground, like I said, but not below the greenhouse. They have it measured out at 250 foot of tubing per 6 foot of greenhouse. And I did get those numbers, and the current cost of these greenhouses are about $180 per lineal foot to up to $280, depending on the type of greenhouse. They have a couple different widths now, and they have passive and active geothermal So I found that this tubing system works best to dehumidify in the winter. These structures get very humid in the winter, so I think that that's where it shines. It also works better at heating than it does at cooling. This is probably my favorite thing about the greenhouse. So I talked about the angle of incidence, and so the way they are structured here, this angle right here is going to allow you to get that low winter sun, but up here you're going to be able to get that high summer sun. So that angle right there is pretty unique to these structures, and that's why it's such a benefit. And so this is how the centrifugal blower fan works. So you're going to be pulling that air in this way, and then they have them positioned so that they are pushing that air that's being pulled in from the greenhouse into the tubes. This is a picture I drew of our greenhouse at the NRD. And I want to explain how they're run to give you a better idea. So we have a set of tubing that runs from the outside, and this is supposed to be ground level. It's covered to prevent snow and little animals and stuff from getting in it, but it's bringing that fresh air in. And this is a passive system. There's just loops into a box right here. But we have a louver right here, and I open these doors. And then in this first wall, these are representing walls. In this first wall, there's 2 blowers. And those blowers come on at whatever temperature I want to set it to. I vary it throughout the season. But they come on and they start sucking that air in. They start bringing that air in, and it pushes that air. And then we have fans that keep that air moving throughout this long, narrow structure. And then another blower here that's pulling this air and pushing it that way. And then I have 2 exhaust fans at this end. So then down here in a box, I'm pulling that lower air in, and I'm pushing it down into a tubing system that runs all the way back up into this in here. So that air comes up, and as this air is being pushed down the greenhouse, and you know what I realized? This is the east side. This is the west side. Sorry. I apologize. So that air comes up, and then that air pushes it that way. So if that makes sense, it's going like this. And so this is kind of going like this, and some of it gets drawn out while some of it's coming back down and just recycling, but not all of that air is recycling. She asked if the blowers were on the south side of this building. So this is going to be the south, this is going to be the north, this is going to be the west, and this is going to be the east. So the blowers are positioned in the walls. These are positioned exactly on the walls. This hangs from the ceiling and it faces the east. This is on this wall as well, and this is oriented downward, so it's pulling that air and pushing it in there. It's not necessarily on the south side, which would be this glazing side. It's actually sat more back towards the north side, but it's not on that north wall. And then these are positioned facing the east, and they're expelling or they're exhausting that hot air. This wall is north, and then this wall is south. This is the glazing. And so on the other side, that is the north wall. She was asking what side the wall was positioned towards. The tubes on the outside, these tubes, they run into the greenhouse, but they are about 8 to 9 feet below ground, depending on who you ask. Some of the disadvantages of these greenhouses, the high humidity in the summer, it slows down transpiration, which slows down nutrient transport. A lot of the plants tend to slow down in the depths of summer inside of the greenhouse. You can get excess solar gain that can be difficult to ventilate because of that aspect ratio. You have this long corridor, so it's kind of difficult to get all that out. If you overfill your greenhouse, those plants will get in the way of that ventilation. And again, this is the same. This is with any greenhouse. These greenhouses perform significantly different by location. That's going to be with any greenhouse structure. I touched on this before. They have poor air stratification management. So you get that hot air at like the pitch, and then your cool air that's pooling on the bottom. So you have a big difference in air temperature throughout the greenhouse. You have less control over those temperature fluctuations. It's really kind of hard to vent them. Adding vents to the structure can be expensive. You can end up with poor heat retention in winter with these particular structures. So it requires that you're careful in how you use your space. And now I'm going to get into our specific greenhouse. This is the west side. This is the south side. This is what we call our classroom. It's our ground level entrance into the greenhouse. It works best as a cold air buffering space in the winter time, and it's a zone 9A. It's 17 foot wide by 30 foot long, and it has a 6 foot little porch, or just the glazing is extended 6 foot. And this is the main growing room. So this is the south side. Here's that blower that I had on the second wall. And then back in here, there's 2 more exhaust fans. I think it's about right here somewhere. There's one of those fans that I had pointed out or drew on there that helps push that air through the greenhouse. Down here, buried under some plants, is the beginning of the tubing system with the centrifugal fan that pushes it down that way, and it comes back around inside the greenhouse. This is a zone 11A within here. It's 84 foot long. It's going to be 17 feet across all the way through. And then the potting rooms. This is the other end of that blower. It's 17 by 18. It's a zone 11A as well. These 2 rooms are 4 foot below ground level. Monthly average water use for this greenhouse is 950 gallons a month. The average family uses almost 500 gallons of water a day. January 2024, we used 200 kilowatt hours with our solar offset. We have a solar array outside that we use to offset some of our electrical use. Average of 45,000 BTU supplemental heating per night, and that's electrical heating. With the solar panel, it came out to $15 for the entire month of January. And I want to tell you, I didn't put anything in here. It's more expensive to cool the greenhouse in the summer. July costs about $27. And this very cold January, last January is a lot colder than this January. So last January was only about $15. This January was a little closer to 10. So this is our solar panel. It's 12 microinverters. The lifetime usage is 35 megawatt hours. And that was like a couple weeks ago. That's the same as 11,748,374 AA batteries, or running a refrigerator for 21 and a half years. All of our produce is donated. We donate to a couple food banks. We've grown 7,000 pounds of produce to date since about 2018. 600 plants donated to different programs around the area. One that I work with is the Migrant Head Start. We have our early education program in the summertime with the kids. And then we have various tours and workshops throughout the year. And we also recently partnered with the Gearing Library to start a seed library program. So this was the original design when the NRD started planning. They were going to do with the space out here. This was the greenhouse, this is our outdoor garden, and then they had native grasses. We put this greenhouse up with $85,000 in local donations and a $31,000 NET dollar grant. So I'm going to go through these because I'm losing time right now. This is the trench, and with these tubes, they're just laid in there. There's not really a layering system, so that's also a bit of a disadvantage. If anything happens, you're 8-9 feet in the ground, and it's probably going to be too expensive to fix. And so you have this north wall, and so you have the excavation. Excavation is going to be the more expensive components of the structure. This is our greenhouse after it just got finished. So then the planting phase, tons of stuff planted in there. It's so pretty. It's beautiful, isn't it pretty? I know this beautiful tropical oasis is really enticing, but there's a lot of issues that are created when you do that. Competition for water, nutrients, poor air circulation. It creates a really good environment for pests and disease to really take over fast. This is not a matter of if, but when. And if you have this overplanted environment, it's going to take over fast, and it's going to be really, really, really hard to manage and control. Less yields if you have your plants producing more leaves and flowers and not getting really good air circulation or sunlight penetration. It's a maintenance mess. Before you plant, I get a soil sample, know your soil. If you don't know what your soil is like, you're going to be chasing a lot of problems down the road. If you plant afterwards, observe your environment, get an idea for what it's like inside the greenhouse on a hot day. They can get very, very hot very, very fast. Have a plan. What's your goal? How are you going to structure this operation if you don't really know what your goal is? Have a good layout. Plant for maturity. Plant for maturity. Hydrozones, don't plant something that has really low water needs next to something that has really high water needs, because one of them or both of them are going to suffer. Know your key pests, they're gonna show up. So know what they are before they show up, and have a management plan before they show up so you're not chasing your tail once you get these pests. and develop a good IPM. So I didn't have any good pictures of our outdoor garden because I rebuilt it last year, and I didn't get any good pictures of it. So this is another local greenhouse, and they do a similar thing. So their outdoor garden is bigger, but it's similar to ours. If you have a greenhouse, you want to keep planting, maybe consider what you can grow outside instead. What can you part with and grow just seasonally? Thought this was really cool. Love cattle panels. And now you see it's just full. It's beautiful. We also added edible landscape outside because there was a lot of trees and stuff inside that I thought was silly to have inside the greenhouse. If you can grow it outside, don't grow it in your greenhouse. If you can grow an apple tree outside or a pear tree outside, don't put it in your greenhouse. These are just some of the things we started with for the outside, the edible landscape. I'm gonna push through here because I've got not a lot of time. I'm going to review this slide and then I want to move to something else. No two greenhouses are the same. There's a big difference between your active and passive solar. You can grow anything, but you can't grow everything. There are a lot of components that are going to affect how your greenhouse stores and uses heat. Your greenhouse design should be informed by the overarching goals of your system. And you can reduce the fossil fuel inputs without reducing efficiency of your greenhouse. And geothermal greenhouses don't necessarily mean zero additional energy inputs. Kind of depends on what you want to grow and what your goals are. So I just want to talk about this. A greenhouse must be designed with a heating capacity large enough to meet the needs for heat loss per hour. So what that's just saying is you have your heating requirement in BTU. So to figure out what your heat loss need is, you take that heat transfer coefficient, which I provided in the earlier slides, those R values and U values. That's going to be your coefficient. And you take that by the surface area of glazing, and then this is your delta, the difference between your desired internal temperature and the outside temperature at night. She'll put the additional slides to some music. If you have any questions on these equations, just reach out to me. I'll help you solve them and figure them out if you'd like to. I do put pollinators in my greenhouse, but I focus more on putting beneficial insects as pest control in my greenhouse. I try to utilize, they'll be called greenhouse plants, or they're just self-fertile, or sometimes I even go and pollinate by hand.